I didn't press record. So let's make sure you can actually hear us and we're not speaking to no one. So we're going to unmute you all I'll count down to 3 and you can all say hi. On your marks. 3, 2, 1. Say hi.
Hi.
Hi. It was like a delayed reaction. Love it. Do we have any delay?
Ever so slightly.
All right, we'll see how we go. Unmuting you all. If you have any problems throughout and that you can't hear us or something's going wrong, just comment in the Facebook event and we'll pick up on it. We are total rookies at webinars, so we'll see how we go. We are waiting on just how many? Oh, that might have been our last person logging on then. So that's 2 about 25. Is Jamie taken off that?
No.
24. Waiting on 2 more and then we'll get crack-a-lacking. As to your fitness and your results. Why we use it is for a number of reasons. It's for your longevity as an athlete, because we know that if athletes tend to train in, say, the black hole or the grey zone, which is above MAF, but not quite hard enough to elicit speed or VO2 max changes, is where there's a lot of inflammation, oxidative stress. That's where overtraining and burnout can occur due to excessive release of cortisol, our stress hormone. The MAF method itself was developed by Phil Maffetone. If you guys haven't come across him, I don't know where you've been, because we obviously harp on about this a lot. He is, I would call him the god of endurance. He's amazing. He's written a lot of books, and you can certainly get into a lot of research beyond what we talk about in this webinar tonight. You can also head to his website, which for those of you on web should be able to see this as I go to it. But it's not working. So it's philmaffetone.com and it looks like his website's currently down. But head to that because he does address a lot of your questions and queries in his FAQ. But tonight we'll probably get into some more specific ones that aren't covered in those basic FAQs. I haven't mentioned why we use it, but I guess other coaches might predominantly use it through just a base and then let it go and not really touch it until the next base phase comes around. But we'll use it all the time, all year round. It's great for your warm-ups, your cool-downs, your recovery sessions, but also all your long, slow base endurance, and you'll learn about why that is so tonight. I touched on before that there are benefits beyond just your fitness. So below the MAF heart rate, or at the MAF heart rate, is where we build that base fitness. But why is that important and what else do we need beyond that? I mentioned longevity. I mentioned that it reduces oxidative stress. For those of you unfamiliar with oxidative stress, that's basically cell damage, putting us at risk of disease, basically at its worst, but more so fatigue, gut problems, inflammation, tendency towards injuries. The actual main driver for Phil Maffetone when he did all his original research and studies to develop the MAF method was on runners to do with their biomechanics and their form. And the MAF method came about because of what he saw in athletes running at a certain heart rate and when their form would start to dissipate. So that's the other benefit of running at MAF, you're less likely to run with poor form and therefore prevent injury. Race fitness as well. I think that's where people get really confused and don't understand why we're doing this. And really struggle with the fact that We're trying to get you to go slower to essentially get faster. We understand that can be really hard to comprehend, that we are slowing you down to get faster, and we'll touch on how MAF relates to race pace in more detail tonight. But at a bottom level, know that that's exactly what it does. We slow you down to get you faster, and not slow you down temporarily to later do lots of speed training. Just by doing the slow base MAF kilometers, you get faster. Just bear with me 1 second. We've just had a question about sound. I'm going to unmute you guys. Can you just confirm that you can hear us? Go ahead.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Haley, I'd say you're alone on that one, and you just might have to check your speakers or try on another device. Sorry, slight interlude. Where was I? So essentially looking at the different ways and benefits, I guess, of why we use MAF, not just through base endurance training. And we'll obviously touch on in more detail of that going essentially slower to actually go faster, and just about every athlete who starts with us goes through that period. I don't think we've had an athlete yet who's what base pace that they have been running is actually a MAF pace. So pretty much every athlete goes through that phase of going slower and then building up. Had never thought about that, but she's 100% right. No one's ever come to us already training at their MAF and doing their warm-ups or base miles, kilometres at the right pace. The other thing I was going to make note of, which is what drove me to create originally, before Sez came on board, the spreadsheet noting everyone's results at MAF tests. So other athletes coming on board could see the results of training at MAF, which has slowed them down to get them faster. And we're going to show you that spreadsheet tonight if you're not familiar with it, and run through some case scenarios of the results that people have got using MAF training. Do you want to go through exactly what is MAF and how to formulate it, calculate it?
Yeah, so when an athlete starts with this, one of the first things that we do, and it's more so the run. You can do it on the bike as well. Do you do any for your athletes on the bike as well? So
Yep.
You can do, and athletes who have seen, an effort level for a run at MAF compared to an effort level on the bike can feel different because as most people would know, it's harder to actually get your heart rate up on the bike, and we might touch on that a little bit further. But basically, do you want to bring up the document that they? So we created a document which basically outlines how to do a MAF test. So that outlines how to calculate what your MAF is. So a general rule of thumb to start with is 180 minus your age. So that's a pretty simple calculation, but there's some variables that come into play there, and we will talk about some of those and how some athletes may have their MAF heart rate actually incorrectly based on some of their MAF results that we've been getting coming through. But as I said, essentially starting at 180 less your age, so just say you're 30, that sits at 150. There are some variables that can come into play, which, as I said, are outlined in this document, which is available in our private group. We can certainly email as well, but that's always been available there, and we make reference to that in your training programs. So most people would be that 180 less their age or less. So less if they've been injured or intermittent training. So someone could be anywhere from 5 to 10 beats lower. Another one we've seen, and we might touch on that soon as well, is actually having a specific test done to see what your crossover point is. Because essentially what we're looking at with MAF, it's your maximum aerobic capacity where you're training there. So we don't want to go over into that threshold level, which is where most people train. Well, most people, before they are aware of sort of MAF training, is actually training in that sort of threshold level. It's not easy, but it's not super hard. So it's what we call that sort of grey zone of not really achieving what we're trying to achieve. So essentially math training is actually trying to minimise that time that is spent in that grey zone. Obviously, some of your training will be done at threshold at specific times in your program, but trying to stay out of that as much as possible.
Just on that, I would say that none, maybe one or two out of our athlete group would warrant adding those 5 beats that Phil Maffetone has stipulated in the guidelines around training consistently 4 times a week. So there should be very minimal people adding anything to their MAF number, and we can explain why later.
Yeah. So that point there was in his theory is if you've been training consistently with no injuries, no interruptions, for 2 or more years, well, then you can add 5. Okay, so if you actually sort of sit back and actually look at your last training in the last couple of years, if you have been training for that or more, as Katie said, there's probably only a very, very small handful of our athletes who actually sit in that space.
More often than not, I'm finding that athletes need to take off 5 more than stay at where they currently are before they can progress further, which will also explain why.
Yeah. And illness comes into that as well. So if you're someone who continually gets ill, there's a good reason to bring that down as well to reduce that risk. Cool. So did you have anything more to add to the testing side?
For those, I know there's a couple of people in the webinar that are HE Connect members, so they don't have a personalised program with us. They might not be as familiar with the test protocols. Just to briefly run over that.
Yeah. So essentially what we're doing, the program sets out a good warm-up. So the one we've been working to is a 10-minute warm-up, nice and easy, and then doing some short little efforts, essentially to bring that heart rate up before letting that settle again, and then going into anywhere between 3 1 kilometres to 6 1 kilometres, depending on the athlete, and we'll stipulate for that for our athletes individually on what test we would actually get them to do. And then obviously a nice cool down, like any session that we recommend is a nice cool down after the test. What you're trying to achieve during those 1 kilometre intervals is a consistent pace and a consistent heart rate at your MAF. So that's the aim of that test. We have athletes that regularly say, I couldn't hold my MAF. Well, you're defeating the purpose of the test. So if you can't hold MAF, you're actually running too fast. And if that means walking, if that means going into a jog that feels like a walk, well, then that's what you need to do to be able to do that test correctly. Otherwise, we don't get that data right. And again, because that helps us actually program for you and as you go through the next 6 weeks to your next test, essentially.
And on that point, if you are having to walk through a MAF test or exceptionally slow jog and it's not something that you're used to, it's not something that your ego likes, you have to understand that through your training, if you do it right and you do follow your program with the MAF heart rate, it's something that you will see an improvement on in 4 weeks. In some people, 6 if their nutrition's not up to scratch or there's been stress or poor sleep, and we'll discuss that later on. So it's not like we're asking you to run and or shuffle like this for 12 months. Something's going wrong if that's the case, and we certainly wouldn't let that happen. On the test protocol, just for future reference, there is something we're going to adjust and has been adjusted in Training Peaks. We're going to have an option for a longer warm-up. For some people that are responders and on that fitter end, you'll find that it might take you a little bit longer to get up to at your MAF. So we've extended your warm-up period option between 10 and 20 minutes. The other thing that's really important, and you'll see the test protocol has been changed to specify this because we wrongly assumed that people would do this. People were doing the warm-up above MAF. Defeats the purpose of a MAF test. You have to do the warm-up at or below MAF as well, just to clarify.
And that's obviously part of why we're here chatting to you guys all, because we see it more often than not, even though we think we explain, give you the information. I think for a lot of people, it actually comes down to that ego. It's like looking at a watch and saying, oh, I never run this slow, or I shouldn't be running that slow. And so it's letting that aside, knowing what your big picture is and what you're actually trying to achieve, and when you're trying to achieve that. And that's obviously what we're here for, to help you get to those goals.
Slow is relative. What does slow mean? You have a headwind, it changes your pace by 15 seconds per kilometre anyway. We can't put our session's effectiveness based on the pace that you did over the entire session. Sure, if you've got a 90-minute run and there's a 20-minute interval in there and the goal is to do some race paces at 70.3 effort, that's the goal in that 20 minutes, to focus on pace and effort. But beyond the whole session, like, your overall average pace means nothing. Nothing.
Yeah. And when we actually analyse sessions, that's what we're looking at, whereas most athletes will look at, oh, sweet, I did 10K in 50 minutes, had an average pace of this, my average heart rate. We're actually looking at specifics, particularly if it's a specific session like that, where there's some threshold or race pace efforts. We're actually analysing your data based on that information. We don't really care unless you're running harder in your warm-up and cool-down than we'd like. It's not that average overall session pace we're looking at. So, again, letting that go, and understanding the purpose of each of your sessions.
I've got a great example. I'm going to take a tangent and put someone in the doghouse a little bit for something they did this week, and they know who they are. They had a session. They're 4 weeks out from a key race, so it's quite an important time. And like everyone, warm-up is below or at MAF, and cool-down was 20 minutes at or below MAF. This person saw that they might hit around that 21-kilometre mark, which means doing a half marathon. So they thought, yeah, I'll just push pace in the last 20 minutes to make sure I hit 21.1. Not what we need to see. Like, the purpose of the session is lost, because that's just going to accelerate the cortisol stress hormone effect at the end of the session, increase inflammation, decrease recovery, impact the session the next day. So if someone wants to do that, you essentially have to go and do another 10 or 20-minute warm-up. I'm getting a notification that we're at limit, so I don't know if someone's trying to log back on that can't hear us, so I apologise.
Tara.
All right. Hopefully we can sort those issues out. We are at capacity, which is pretty cool. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of some frequently asked questions and issues that we come across.
Yeah, so I'm going to run through a few questions, and these are actually more questions that we get in general, and so actually answering the same questions to athletes all the time. One of the big ones that athletes will ask, what if I have to walk and that's what my MAF is? What is your general, our explanation on what to do there?
So there's a couple of scenarios. If we go through the first two, scenario one would be that someone has to walk at their MAF heart rate the entire test. This does happen and has happened. It can be for a number of reasons. One, that's just where that person's fitness is currently at. If that person has perhaps not been a complete beginner or had a year off and they have actually been training, that would be a huge signal to us that there's some overtraining and depletion, some burnout, potentially some illness going on there. If it's their first time exercising in a while, that would make sense. It's also possible that someone can regress back to that point. So they might have been able to run or jog walk at their MAF, and then one day they can't, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I think we'll touch on that later. So the question is it okay to walk a MAF? Absolutely. It doesn't actually matter on the mode. So if you think about swimming, biking, running, so long as we are working in that maximal aerobic function capacity zone, so below MAF or at it, we're still building aerobic base. Doesn't matter how you get there. I know we've both had quite a few athletes really enjoy sessions named play on their program, which might involve taking kids or the dog down to the beach or the park, throwing a stick, jumping on equipment, monkey bars, etc., barefoot walking and grass running, etc., and still achieving essentially a MAF heart rate session without even noticing it. And I think that's a beautiful thing. It doesn't have to be this painful, ego demoralizing way of going about building a fitness and a base.
Yeah, and a good way we do, I know I do a lot with a lot of my athletes, I'm pretty sure you do as well, Katie, is you might have a 30-minute MAF run, but it could be broken down into actual walk run. So it could be 10-minute MAF 1-minute walk, just to bring that heart rate down a little bit, because what will happen is that may gradually increase over a duration. Walk for a minute, bring it back down a few beats, and then actually going again.
Yeah. And you'll see as your program progresses. So, for example, if we're bringing someone from a place where they're having to walk at MAF, their training sessions would involve something like a 2-minute jog, 1-minute walk. And as that improves, it's going to go 3-minute jog, 1-minute walk, up to that 9 and 1, 10 and 1.
Yeah.
And so for your purposes, you can know that that's where we're heading from a progression point of view. If someone's MAF is at a walking pace, it means that we strip back the program to trail walking. So we incorporate heels, or we go for walks with backpacks on and add a little bit of weight. You'd be surprised that can up your heart rate quite easily, because it does bring up to question how low is too low, and we will touch on that.
Yeah.
The second scenario is someone that is having to jog, walk at MAF, and it's kind of like, oh, do I walk or do I jog? And that is a hard decision, and that will change, I think, in each session depending on one's stress levels, nutrition, sleep, and the training they've done the day before. So I think you don't need strict rules on that as to what you should do. This is where you need to be intuitive and figure it out for yourself on the day, and really listen to what your body needs. Look at your heart rate, see what it's telling you. That is that your heart rate monitor is working correctly. We know it can give some crappy readings. Now, I went off on a tangent there. What I would recommend is stripping back for 2 to 4 weeks and do the trail walks with a backpack, and strip out the running, so that then in 4 weeks you can comfortably jog a little bit more than before. So it's not like a 30-second jog, walk again before your heart rate spikes. So how you would determine whether to do that or not, I think if you can't jog at or below MAF for around 3 minutes, I'd go down to a walk consistently, and just maybe work in like 30-second surges if you need to bring that heart rate up slightly to keep the MAF just a little bit higher, still under, but not low.
Yeah. Cool. So that sort of covers, particularly I'm conscious of some of our athletes who this is, say, one end of the scale. We'll certainly talk about the other end of the scale as well. So athletes that are getting really good results and seeing really big improvements in their
I thought of a third scenario.
Yeah.
Those that have previously been able to run quite comfortably at MAF, and then suddenly they can't. So perhaps you're doing a recovery session, or your warm-up, or a cool-down, or an endurance session, and you notice, let's say your MAF pace is normally 5:30 and it's pushing out to 6:30. That's a massive red flag that you need to listen to. Again, it might be that there's too much load, overtraining, burnout, stress, sleep, lots of different factors. And that's why we use these parameters, because we can pick up on issues before they become a big problem.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Okay, so another one point we had here is what a crappy math result can tell us, and we've got a few scenarios, or actually some results that we're going to have a look at, I believe. Just to give you a bit of an example on when we do get test results come through, to see what they're actually telling us, and whether we and what we take away from them.
All right, I'm just going to bring up our next screen to show you the spreadsheet. Dana, I've given you the specialty of being unmuted. Can you just tell me that you can see the spreadsheet?
Yeah, I can see it. Sorry, I thought I accidentally clicked unmute.
No, that was me. All good. Okay, so we can see that. I'll unmute you. So the question was, what about some crappy MAF test results? For example, and I want to preface that when I say crappy, I'm not saying that you guys have done a crap job and you're a crap person. Let's just be really clear. What we mean by crappy MAF results is just something that's out of the ordinary, not so great, and probably a little bit frustrating. So if I bring up this result here, you'll notice that they're not far apart. So we've got about 2 to 3 weeks apart. Same heart rate, a 2-minute difference in the average pace of the test, 2.5 minutes. Right? Yeah. Oh, no, sorry, over here I was right. The average pace over the test was a 2-minute difference in 3 weeks. Do you reckon that person got that much faster in 3 weeks? The answer is no. What happened was when they went and did the first test, they had quite a stressful day, felt stressed about the test in general, which can happen for a lot of people. You know, the word test sparks a few red flags for people. So we went and did it a couple of weeks later and instructed to do some mindfulness beforehand, yoga and belly breaths to calm the system down. And the result was that 8 minutes 30 per kilometre versus 10:30, which is essentially a walk. Now, had we programmed off 10:30, it would have looked very different to a program based on 8 minutes 30 per kilometre. Okay, so that's one example of like a red flag test that we would, you know.
If I just had a quick one, it's not necessarily in regards to MAF, but if you look at it, said mainly the simple change there was actually how that person led into the session. That you can do basically for any type of session. Someone who might get anxious in a swim, even before a race. So if you can actually have some protocols in place that that will calm you down, that can actually change the outcome of what you're actually going to achieve
in a really big way.
Yeah.
Might discuss that later about too low, too high. This result here, Sarah asked me today, was that a mistake 2 days later doing a MAF test? And I said no. The reason was that this person, and that's why I've called it test 1 and test 1, because it was a redo, went out and did their MAF test and really struggled to, sorry, this is the first one here on the 16th of March, struggled to run at their MAF heart rate and didn't fully understand it, and that's on us because we have to explain it a little bit better, which is why we're doing tonight. And so they thought it was obviously a run test, so they ran at what would be their easy pace and just did the test that way. Obviously, after some explanation, we went and did it again at the designated MAF heart rate. So this person's MAF is meant to be at 140. The first time they did the test, the average heart rate was 158 with a pace of 620. The second time we did it 2 days later, obviously a big difference, holding 142 and a pace of 855, which was much more accurate. The cool thing was that actually resulted still in a really good run off the bike result in a 70.3 by adopting a jog for 9 minutes and a walk for 1 minute strategy. Okay. Any other out of the ordinary MAF results you want to chat about?
I think there are 2 pretty key ones that popped up for us. Yeah, for sure.
All right.
So just a reminder as well, if you have any sort of questions on anything that we are going over, either write them down, pop them on our Facebook group, or save them to ask it at the end. So the other one is what we can see in athletes is plateaus in MAF tests. So if we've done sort of regular MAF tests, over every 4 or 6 weeks, and actually see the test results plateau, what that means, and then what we'd actually do as a coach.
Just want to clarify that we're talking about someone that has initially had results, improved, and then has stayed the same.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about someone that has not responded at all from the start.
Yeah.
Okay, what does it mean? We've alluded to this. It could mean that simply someone's feeling really stressed, whether that's either psychologically, mentally feeling stressed, or physically feeling stressed. This is a really important point the body processes stress in exactly the same way, whether it be mental or physical, perceived or actual. Okay.
Can you repeat that just so I know
Yeah.
I've heard it lots, but just so people actually register that?
The body doesn't process stress any differently, whether it be physical, mental, perceived, or actual. So let's say you're sitting on the couch at night, relatively physically relaxed, but in your mind, you're stressing and going around and round and round in circles about things that happened that day, things you've got to do tomorrow, things that are happening in 5 years' time. That is the same physiological response to your body. It's going to process the stress in the same way that it would going out and doing a training session, which is why we, I really encourage our holistic approach of mindfulness and breathing and integrating yoga and walking and time out with family and play and not being so strict with data and numbers and all these things that us A-type athletes are so good at that we really need to pull back on. So stress is one reason that there can be a plateau. 2, it can be a sign of overtraining and burnout. For those of you who haven't come across Healing the Grumpy Athlete, the ebook that I wrote that covers that in big detail. Don't worry, guys, I am doing a male version for you. The other things it might mean is nutrition. So if someone, just to clarify, that maximal aerobic function, the goal there is that we're predominantly burning fats. Now, for 1 gram of fats, we get 9 calories of energy. For 1 gram of carbohydrates, we get 4 calories. So we get more energy from burning fats. It's a more efficient fuel. Not only that, we have a plethora of it lying on our body. We don't have to shovel in carbohydrates to stay topped up and fueled. So you can imagine in a half Ironman or an Ironman, if you're effectively racing at or below MAF, you could go all day. And there's no need for you to have, how many gels did you have in Ironman? 21. Yeah. This is before we discovered all of this. And end up on the toilet and gassed and bloated like you're pregnant. That's no fun, and that's what we're trying to avoid, because the more you try and put pressure on your gut to absorb lots of gels or carbohydrate, the more likely are you to have gastrointestinal distress and lots of other health issues. Because what we see, and I didn't mention this earlier on, is that the big reason we use it is we see so many athletes that are fit, not healthy. Mm-hmm. And with the MAF method, you can have health and performance all at the same time. And I don't know why, but that seems to be a bit of a myth in our industry, which really sucks. Yeah. I tangented. I'm really good at that. Nutrition. So if someone's a high sugar burner, and they're just eating lots of carbohydrates and their macronutrient profile is heavily geared towards processed carbohydrates, they're going to respond slower or not respond at all to MAF method training because the body's not utilising or learning how to burn and utilise fats. I reckon that might bring up a bunch of questions and confusions for people. I don't want to step too much into the nutrition world. If you jump onto the Real Food Real podcast with Steph Lowe, I interviewed her on episode 30 on this exact topic. Write that one down, go listen to it, and then shoot us your questions, because we go into 60-minute detail on that side of nutrition and fat burning involving MAF as well.
And I can just say, if any athletes out there who aren't listening to any podcast, highly, highly recommend. You can do it in the car, on the train, heading to work, easy runs. I listen to mine all the time. There's so much information that you can get from podcasts without actually, sitting down and physically reading a book. Very valuable information if you grab the right podcast.
Definitely. Love it. Next question. Lay it on me.
Okay. So apart from sort of those who actually come and then plateau, we've also seen some non-responders. We might show an example of what that looks like, and then what we actually do with someone like that.
Okay. Non-responders. Generally, it's because the calculated predicted MAF heart rate is wrong. So if I use this example here, Hopefully you guys can all see that. When we first did the test for this person, their heart rate was calculated to be at a MAF of 138. They went and did the test with a result of 10:55, 11:09, 11:24, averaging 11:09. After a couple of months, we just didn't see a result in training or in the test. And we were a little bit perplexed because we knew that this person was sticking to nutrition really well, had made a really big effort with that adaptation coming from a sugar burner, still had work to do by any means, but it just didn't match up. So this athlete went and got metabolic efficiency testing conducted in a laboratory setting up in Queensland with mental blank, Jupiter Health. Yeah, got it. And through that test, we discovered that her crossover point of where she was burning fats to carbohydrates was actually a lot lower than we thought it was. And when we talk about crossover point, that's our approximation of what the MAF heart rate is. So when we get an MET test, it helps us recalculate an individual MAF heart rate as opposed to using a text formula off the internet. So looking at someone's physiology individually. After that test, we adjusted to 120 beats per minute. Okay. This test was then conducted from memory. That test was conducted in February, the MET test, and this MAF test was in April. And the result was an improved MAF pace, but yet, what's that? 18 beats less.
Yeah.
That was done purely on trail walks, bike, and swimming. No running. This athlete is now running, is getting speed, is feeling great, has energy, can run up hills like an absolute demon. So that was a really great lesson for us as coaches as well as this athlete. That's one example of a non-responder. Just to clarify what a non-responder is, would be someone that has 2 or more MAF tests that stay the same or get slower without extraneous variables such as wind, hilly terrain, different courses, like that impacting. Yeah, for females, just FYI, your menstrual cycle can impact your MAF test. I personally experienced that the other week and it changed by a minute and a half. It was demoralizing at the time, but a great lesson that I don't do MAF tests around then. Even though they're super easy, it still had a big physiological effect. So that's really important to note. In those scenarios, we might go and retest, flatter course or the course they did before, and make sure that that test was either valid or invalid and proceed from there. So with a non-responder, we would look at nutrition, we would look at stress management, and we would look at potentially getting some metabolic efficiency testing done in a laboratory setting to see if that MAF is indeed correct and appropriate. Or if we can't, not everyone can afford metabolic efficiency testing, and we will provide resources for that. We're on the side of caution and we drop the MAF heart rate by 5 to 10 beats, train at that for 4 weeks, retest. And if we get a result, we know that that's the answer. That's about it.
Cool. All right. So another questions that we have from athletes is how low is too low? So essentially if they're going out, and actually happens to me sometime, we had sort of a conversation as well, is I'll go out for a run and I actually can't get my MAF rate up based on the effort level. So I want to go out for an easy run, but for me, an easy run might feel like, just say my MAF is 150, an easy run to me will be my heart rate at 120. If I went any harder than that, to me, physically it would feel like a hard run. So sometimes we have ones like that. Other people go, if I'm going out and sitting at 120, but my MAF is 150, am I still getting the benefits of that training?
So 2 scenarios there. I just want to touch on Sarah's scenario first of all. She's now a mega efficient fat burner. Would you agree?
Yeah, hopefully.
Definitely doesn't need 21 gels to get through an Ironman anymore. So that's a reason why for her running easy is 120, 130 beats per minute as opposed to her calculated MAF of 150. So if Sarah went and did MAT testing, we would probably see a crossover point that validated that. It also means that she's a super chilled, zen out chick. And she's fit and amazing. And the other scenario is how low is too low for, say, someone that is doing the walking efforts, or you are even doing a ride and you can't get your MAF heart rate up close to where you need it to be. How low is too low? Try and get it within a window of 15 beats less than your MAF heart rate. 15 to 20 beats per minute as a rule of thumb. Answer that.
So then if we look at the other side, people go, okay, my MAF's 150, but is it okay to go 154, 155? So the question there is, what's the window on the other side of your MAF and how high is too high?
Sorry, I'll take one step back before I answer that. The reason why low can be too low, you're just simply not going to get a response. Like, there is a point where training really isn't training, and we still need to elicit an aerobic response.
Yeah, and it comes down to that, training for the sake of training. You're going out and running, but you're not really getting the benefit. You may as well
walking,
use that. Or whatever it is that, you could use that time, in other ways. Yeah.
And it's the same for the reverse, like you just asked. Yeah. But the window is very different. So this comes from Phil Maffetone. All it takes is being 2 to 3 beats per minute above your MAF for you to shift into sugar burning, for that to cross over that maximal aerobic function threshold, and for it to essentially become a grey zone black hole training session. So the answer is, don't go above MAF.
And you're
be conservative.
Yeah, better off going slightly lower than that, I'm just about, but I'm 4 or 5 over. You're better off pulling that back and actually going slightly under.
Yeah. Because I would say that 98% of athletes, I'm being really careful here, 98% of athletes that come to us wouldn't already be fat burners. It's very rare. We have to train it. We have to be diligent with our nutrition. And so stepping into that zone above MAF is only making that issue worse, because you're heightening your need for carbohydrates and likely going to end up craving more and, quote unquote, feeling like you need more carbohydrates. And because you are burning more in that carbohydrate zone, then you probably will, and that's going to affect your metabolic efficiency and your health and your ability to fuel correctly on race day as well.
Yeah. So have a look at yourself and your training and how you feel and how you eat during the day, and have a look and whether you feel that applies to you and whether you could actually be a little bit more diligent on that side of it, and actually then see how that does change how you feel during the day and what you feel like you want to eat as well.
That's a really good point. I've been throwing around that word sugar burner. Just to clarify, to summarise really quickly without going into that podcast I referred you to, if you are hungry, hangry, grumpy, starving after like 2 hours of eating, your meal before wasn't right. If you're efficient fat burner and you're metabolically efficient, you will last 3 to 5 hours from each meal.
Yeah, which is and even if I go back, 3 or 4 years of when I trained and race, it's the total opposite to what people are used to. Again, this is a whole sort of separate topic in itself, but a lot of people still can't get their head around. I'm training for a long course. That's just what I do. I'm training so much I have to eat every 2 hours. Well, no, you actually don't. If you do it correctly.
All right, saving me a stack of money not eating like that.
Yeah. All right. So last one before we get on to some of your questions.
Backtrack again. Just thought of something. How high is too high? There's also probably want to clarify why we then put hard polarized efforts in there.
Mm-hmm.
So the polarized training model brings into MAF, but we also bring in intensity because there absolutely is a place for intensity and speed. We're not saying that you're never going to run at speed or threshold or pace ever again. What we're looking for with a polarized model of training is that 80% of your week is made up of MAF or below. That's in a healthy individual. Overtraining, burnout, adrenal fatigue, illness, etc. You're looking at 90-95% of your week in the MAF. The other 20% is high intensity, but it needs to be high intensity, not like somewhat hard, can sort of chat, a little bit breathless, black hole, grey zone training. So if we use a numbers example, what that would look like is 150 and below is MAF, and then you would stay out of around the 150 to the 170 and go well above that to do your hard, high intensity efforts for a polarized model of training.
And that's what you'll see, or you should see in a lot of your sessions, you know, those, whether it's hill repeats or sprints, efforts on the bike, those sorts of things. So you're actually really eliciting that, you know, VO2 max response.
Yeah, so it's got purpose.
Yeah.
Because if we're training in that black hole, there's no real purpose unless you are purposefully doing race pace efforts for something like a sprint Olympic distance, maybe a 70.3, depending on where you're at. That's where black hole training has a purpose if you need to do a 20-minute, 30-minute race pace effort.
Yeah.
But again, that's not every session. That's pretty infrequent. And it's not your whole year either.
Yeah, very specific.
Yeah.
So then going on to that, we're still, I know will be really relevant for those who are still racing right now, heading into Cairns. Really, the main one is left. We've got half a dozen or so heading up there. MAF and how it relates to race pace. And I think this is where we'll sort of really solidify again the purpose of why we use MAF, why we collect the data, those sorts of things. And then also how that those paces differ to, say, a pure running event, so a half marathon compared to a half Ironman, marathon versus Ironman, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll give you some examples of some tests around that as well.
Okay, so the questions come up. How on earth do I race hard and fast when all I've been doing is training at MAF, or quote unquote, you guys call it slow. I certainly don't like to refer to it as slow because I think you're way too hard on yourselves, regardless of what pace you are running / walking at. Is that the answer is yes. You are going to get faster. I always use the analogy that if here and below, I really hope you guys can see me right now for this analogy, here and below is your maximal aerobic function, or where you build your base, right? So that's all the fat burning. If we're building that base and increasing that efficiency, that's going to improve and that's going to increase. What sits above the maximal aerobic function, you've got your threshold, lactate threshold. So with the aerobic base increasing and coming up and up and up and up, this doesn't just stay here. Your threshold pace, which is essentially your race pace around that 70.3 mark, increases as well without you even having to train at threshold pace. That's how we make it happen. But beyond that, with the polarized model, training up, I hope you can see my hands, polarized model training well above that, we're also expanding your VO2 max, your ability to push oxygen around your body. It's late for Katie. This is normally my bedtime. So the answer is yes, you can still get faster and will be able to achieve race pace goals by training at MAF. For those of you who aren't familiar with Mark Allen, he's one of the greatest Ironman world champions going around. What's his record? 8? Sorry, how many times did he win?
A lot.
It's about 8. He was coached by Phil Maffetone. And Mark Allen now coaches with this model with many athletes. Tim O'Donnell is one of them, so Mirinda Carfrae's husband, amongst others. So it's being used in a race application everywhere around the world. You just have to dig around it for more examples. But let's use our athletes as an example for now. Here we've got, All right, 6 MAF heart rate results between May 13th, 2015 through to today. This person's MAF heart rate is 150. This result here on May 13th was 2 months after their Ironman, and their Ironman pace was completed. They had a blowout with injury issues around the 5:45 mark. This person's fitness actually increased post Ironman with rest and recovery and adaptation. Funny that. And then after an inconsistent year of training, got back into it and surprised themselves with a 4:35 in September that year. Then with some consistent training thereafter, it improved even further. But even with that inconsistent training at the September mark, there was no speed or threshold or race pace efforts done before then, and they went and raced. And they raced in October, which would have been 3 weeks after the test. Come on, mouse work. And they averaged a pace of 4:17. So their MAF result 3 weeks prior was 4:35, and on race day off the bike, they're doing 4:17. Now, across the board, there's not enough data for us to make conclusions as to what's a hard and fast rule of what you can expect across an Olympic or a half Ironman. There is for Ironman, which we'll discuss. So what we're really looking for when we start getting into racing after having lots of MAF test results is just creating a relationship for each athlete and how they generally respond on race day compared to their MAF. If I keep using that same example, okay, between that 4:35, there was, I can't remember what happened between September and December to have that slight increase in pace. And since then, they've been quite consistent, bringing it down from 5:02 to 4:46, 4:37, and now 4:24. To relate that to this person's goal, they are doing a marathon shortly, I think within 9 weeks. And the goal is to run a 4:10 pace. Essentially, this athlete has already achieved what they need to be able to run that goal, because the general rule of thumb from Phil Maffetone is that we look at our marathon pace per kilometre minus 15 seconds. Okay, I'll just repeat that. So we look at our average MAF from the test minus 15 seconds per kilometre to get an approximate goal pace for a marathon. Now, the questions come up as to whether that applies to an Ironman and running off the bike. I had a chat to Phil Maffetone himself about this one and the best way to do it. His answer was, if you ride to MAF, you will be able to run effectively off the bike for your marathon because you haven't overridden and you've stayed in that fat burning state and you're not going to quote unquote bonk. That was his response to that. But then I proposed an idea. I said, what if we did our MAF tests off as a run off the bike? Which is exactly what we'll now do for our Ironman athletes to help us dictate race pace. Do we need an interlude for technology difficulties?
No, so just someone brought up that they can just see just the spreadsheet and not ourselves, which is totally fine if that's all you're seeing.
You don't need to see our mugs.
That's fine, but then I think some others can still see both if they split their screens.
Okay, cool. Spreadsheet's probably more important to see at the moment. Let's highlight this awesome result that happened recently. So this athlete here did a MAF test result back in October 2015 where they got an average pace of 6:08. And then in January of this year, brought that down to 5:34, which is really common for us to see around that 20-30 seconds per kilometre between tests, around that 6-week mark difference between. Then they went on to race just this weekend gone by. So what's that, 5 months later after that test?
4. Yep.
4 months later. And they were able to maintain a pace of 5:06 per kilometre over 21 kilometres of a 70.3, so run off the bike. If we had this test, say 2 weeks prior, we could make some predictions, say, moving forward in 70.3 races and look at, say, a 30-second difference between MAF and race day. But I would say that maybe they made a fair bit of improvement between that January and April. So we would need to look at that moving forward. So that's how it relates to race. In short, there's no real, rule or calculation. At the end of the day, we just have to improve our metabolic efficiency and fat burning to ensure success, and race smart on race day, and know what it feels like to race at MAF if you don't wear heart rate. Ride within yourself, and that will enable an effective run off the bike.
Yeah, and that is definitely key there, is riding within yourself, you see. So particularly over long distance, short distance you can get away with, but long distance, over racing the bike or trying to race other people's races because they're around you will be your biggest downfall in a long course. And so many athletes learn the hard way. They've put all the training in, they've trained at the paces they know and the effort levels they know they can hold, but then on race day just get excited, get caught up with it, and actually then over race the bike. And they might give themselves 5 minutes on the bike, but then lose 15, 20, half an hour if it's an Ironman on the run, and it's that 5 minutes is really insignificant then. So yeah, definitely.
All right, we're going to throw over to your questions. We hope that majority we've answered just in this webinar. Some that I know we haven't. From Jackie, who I don't think has logged in tonight, but let's answer it anyway. Should MAF heart rate be adjusted or during or post having a cold or flu, and if so, for how long? All right. Let's say you have the sniffles and it's like you feel like you are potentially just getting sick. First step is to test your heart rate variability. If you don't know how to do that or you don't know what it is, discuss it with either of us, because that is definitely the first step to give you a really accurate measure of how much that potential illness is impacting you, and we can advise you as to whether you need to pull back on training, not do it at all, or go ahead as planned. If you are sick for longer than a week, and particularly respiratory illness, you definitely need to adjust that MAF as per the instructions, minusing 5 to 10 beats. Mm-hmm. How long to do it for? Until you recover. Like if you're not feeling better and your immunity hasn't improved, why would you add it back up? So you keep that low heart rate number until you are seeing that an improvement in pace or an improvement in a MAF test, and then you can bring it back up to what you were normally at. Same goes for, say, post-pregnancy, similar situation. Does that answer that?
Yeah. Yep. I'm not sure who this one was from. When I should be running at MAF and I'm struggling, and therefore my heart rate is high, is that a sign that I'm not fit enough?
I think we covered this. Yeah, absolutely, because MAF is a measure of our aerobic capacity. Yeah. And you're all here getting help from us to train for endurance, and we need aerobic capacity to do that. So it absolutely is a measure of cardiovascular aerobic fitness. And if probably the most important thing is that doesn't mean you go and compare to, say, someone else's MAF heart rate and go, oh, theirs is a minute faster than me, therefore they might be fitter. It is so relative. You've got to remember there's so many factors that play into this, age and gender and how long they've been doing it for and blah, 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 blah. So try not to get yourself too worried about that.
Yeah.
Have we got any questions that have been happening while we've been chatting?
One question actually, which we haven't touched on. So MAF and swimming, or does it not matter when you're swimming?
All right. Again, swim session purpose. So if it's an easy technique base endurance swim, we would expect that you're not getting too breathless, therefore sticking to the purpose of the session. Because if you're pushing too hard in a base endurance session or you're pushing too hard in a technique session, what is the point? Can you build technique while your heart rate's in your throat? I don't think so. So sticking to the purpose is probably the most important thing. And then when you've got speed intervals, you push them, but then you have your long recovery to balance that out. And the same principles as, say, run, bike, you've got your warm up and your cool down. So don't skip that in a swim session. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
You'll find that when at the start of a season or when you start with this, there's a significant period of technique and base building sessions if you haven't been doing that already, and that's enough to build your aerobic base in the pool.
Yeah,
for sure.
So Janine, so your question there, does your MAF heart rate change over time? Okay, so if we go back to understanding what MAF heart rate is, it's that magic number 180 minus your age. So that will change as you get older, yes. So when you were 20, your MAF heart rate will be different to 30 years later when you're 50. So which is why you'll see it's not a relative to your fitness, it's relative to age more so than anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that's where the biggest criticism comes of film acetone in the industry. Like, we've been completely open and honest. Like, there are obviously people that bash on this. Totally, you're going to find it everywhere. But majority, are for it. The reason that people bash on it now and again is they have the argument of age doesn't matter. Now, Phil really just comes back to the data that he's collected over years and years and years. I'm pretty sure he originally gathered this data in the 70s. This has been happening a really long time. And the reason we adopt it and we stick with it is because we see results, and we continue to see results, and we have weighed up the other evidence and seen that hasn't worked for athletes. So yes, age is a factor. The other part of that question is increased metabolic efficiency. Yes. If as you get older, for example, that MAF is changing, but you're actually getting more metabolically efficient, so you're becoming a greater fat burner, that could potentially change your MAF level for sure. If you get MET testing in a laboratory setting, we could determine that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we've got to go based on MAF test results. Basically, the bottom line, if you are getting results training at MAF in a 4-week or a 6-week test, we don't need to change anything. It means we're doing it right.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, we're going to unmute. I know we've run over and get people to ask some questions. All right, over to you guys.
Covered everything.
Maybe.
Does anyone have
Yeah.
use themselves as an example, or something you may have seen?
Yeah.
No question's a silly question.
Someone's there.
It's Faz here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Faz.
I just had a question. I'll use myself as an example. My results were about.
Hang on, one sec, Faz. If you do have background noise, things like that, can you just make them down? You get a lot of feedback from the things around you.
I'm just going to unmute and then unmute Faz. Okay, Faz, go ahead.
Is that better?
That's better.
Yeah. I was just going to say I had really good MAF results about less than a month ago, but now I've obviously got injuries. And I did a MAF run today and I was close to a minute slower. Do I need to adjust my MAF, or how does it work?
Yeah, absolutely. When dealing with injuries, particularly long term, we definitely need to bring that MAF down between 5 and 10 beats per minute. Go conservative, get results, and then bring it up 5 again, and then 5 again when you're getting results.
Yeah. Which can be hard, mentally can be a hard thing to do and go, only a few weeks ago I was running this and it felt easy, and all of a sudden it feels like you've taken 10 steps backwards, but you need to do that. Otherwise, again, you're going to be pushing your body when your body's trying to tell you something, particularly whether it's injury or illness. So that's when it's so important to listen to your body, because it knows better than anyone. better than us.
And just on that, sorry, you said you had some good MAF results just weeks ago. Tell me more about that.
I did that test that Sarah was talking about where you do the 3 1 kilometres.
Yep.
And comparing that to my MAF results probably from October last year, I was a minute faster.
A minute faster this time?
Yeah.
I'm looking back at results between October and April. You cut off 30 seconds per kilometre.
Yeah, it was 30 seconds, yeah.
However, your average heart rate in the test was 155. I don't want you to have to tell everyone how old you are if you don't want to, but I'm curious as to why it sat at 155. Because I'm pretty sure you're not.
I know I went through it with Sarah. I can't remember. I'm 31. I don't have any issue telling people that. And I think the main thing was that I've had a consistent training over the last 2 years or so.
Okay. But you've been injured in that time? Probably, yeah, I did have the ITB, but that was Berlin, I think, and that was just over a year ago. I'm afraid it's not nothing. This is a really good question. I'm glad it came up. That niggles are still going to impact our body on a physiological level in a really big way, and injuries and niggles are a stress. So if you've got an underlying issue, especially something like an ITB, that's not enough pain to stop you from running, but perhaps it's enough that it's just there and you can run through it and you notice it, that's still a physiological stress response that could be bumping your heart rate up a good 5 to 10 beats per minute. So
that makes sense.
Yeah, so the good thing is that you're in a base phase at the moment, so we can perhaps recalculate and relook at that and readdress on a one-on-one basis. Does that sound good?
Yep, it does, definitely.
Any other questions while you're unmuted? Nope, good. I'll unmute again for everyone if someone wants to speak up and ask a question.
I know, Paul, you've just posted claiming that you're oldest in the group, so that's
not true.
But you do have a MAF of 133, saying it's a lot lower than obviously a 30-year-old. And he's asking Coach Katie when he can increase it to 138. So he wants to add
when you stop running half marathons at lunchtime when you shouldn't. That's the short answer, my friend. When can you increase it to 138? When we've had at least 3 to 4 BAF test results that show improvement, you haven't gotten sick, you haven't eaten 3 bars of chocolate a day, etc., etc., etc. So there's a few factors that would allow us to put that up. So being a long-term athlete is one of them, but if you've been training for, say, 5 years or longer in endurance, but there's been interruptions and you're a high sugar burner and you've got a lot of stress in your life, that's really irrelevant. We need to be on the conservative side. I hope that answers that. All right, you're still unmuted. Anyone want to ask a question, or Paul want to ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, it's Jess here. I have a question.
Oh, you're here. Hi, Jess. Yep.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, so I just posted, I'm just interested to know what Dana's heart rate was for her Busso run compared to her MAF. So was it higher or was it the same?
Yes, we do have that.
Oh, sorry, I didn't wear it. I thought about it, and then I realised I hadn't practiced swimming in it, and then I was too scared to do anything new on race day.
Totally fine. I would imagine we could potentially go back through Dana's data and probably tell you based on race-paced efforts that she did in training. I would guesstimate around 170.
Yeah, maybe not even that.
Not even.
I'll look that.
Right, okay.
It's on Strava somewhere.
Yeah.
All good. Does that answer that, Jess?
Okay, so yeah, so she's more going on feel rather than oh my gosh, I must stay at math.
Yes.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes. Now, I know you had a question around how, actually, we haven't answered this, how to calculate, say, a race pace for your race goal. Other than that marathon example that we gave, it will be very individual. And what we would do is look back on your data in, say, long runs and runs off the bike to help you calculate what you might realistically be able to achieve. Jess, I looked at yours today, so we can definitely chat about that. Basically, what we're saying is that isn't the
great. Thank you.
Race pace.
Yep.
Very good. Any other questions?
Does anyone want to share their experience of, you know, when they've been with us for 6 months or 2 months, their experience of their MAF test and how they feel like, so actually implementing MAF into your training, how do you feel that has benefited you? Brett, are you there, Brett?
I've definitely.
Or who was that popping up? Sound like Joe.
Yeah, it was me. I was going to say, before when I was training, I was pretty much always doing all my runs at speed, as you probably know from looking at my results.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've found it easier now to run more slowly, but I still find it hard to actually hold form running slow. My form's always a lot better when I'm doing work than when I'm going slowly, which I always find weird.
Yeah, and so let's put that word slow. What pace are we talking about that you would run at MAF?
Probably about 4:30 to 4:40.
So slow. I mean, really.
Around there. But I was doing all my efforts at 4:05 before.
Yeah, and that's the thing, that what doesn't keep athletes in the sport long-term training that way by any means. What I was going to say was I lost my train of thought. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, we do that. Yeah, and that's a big one, you know, for us, which we alluded to at the start. It's not just about getting your goal for this one race. Most of you are in the sport because you love the sport, you want it to actually be part of your life as well. And so this is where MAF becomes a big part of that. If you're redlining all the time, yes, you'll get results, and yes, you'll potentially get good results as well. But at the same time, there's going to be a crash at some point, and we see it all the time. I've been there personally. Katie's been there personally. I'm sure every one of you sees it, you know, a lot after, you know, big races that people do. Is you'll see people come in the sport and then literally go out the other end because they've just redlined the whole time they've been training. Put so much stress on their body that that at some point it actually gives up because it just can't cope with it anymore.
Unfortunately, it's not a matter of if, it's literally a matter of when.
Yeah.
I can very confidently say that. I remembered my point. I would like to look at your technique and form. I'm sure both of us would. At that 4:30 pace, I think it's really important as you step into long course to be able to hold form at those base mileage paces, because they're essentially your long course paces. And if form is faltering, that's really interesting. That might be a core functional strength issue, something I'd be keen to look at for sure.
Yeah. Can't remember, Joe, are you coming, or are you free to go? We can talk anyway. Come next weekend to our run performance workshop. I'll chat to you separately about that.
I think we've got 2 spots left. All right, let's take one more.
Oh, good.
Actually, if Brett's still there, I know you've had amazing results. Brett, do you want to tell us about your results?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I reckon, like, I've never obviously done this MAF training before, and I'm 7 years into tries, done seven half Ironmans with pretty good results. But I just feel like since I started with you guys a few months ago, that I've done a lot less running, probably at sort of like race pace, I guess. But what I've felt is when I do those, 30 minutes at MAF, I go out, Sarah gets me to do an hour and a half run, 30 at MAF, 30 at race pace, 30 at MAF, that I'm holding, it's really, I'm actually getting quicker and quicker at race pace with a lot less effort than what I was probably a year ago. And it just feels like it's been a lot less work, and I'm coming out of these sessions a lot fresher. So the week after, it's a Sunday run, so the week after last year, I'd really struggle probably that week if I went and did a, fairly intense, 8 or 10K race pace effort on an hour and a half run, where now it just feels like it's a breeze and the times are coming down considerably. Last year I was probably running around 4 15-minute Ks in those efforts and was just completely smoked at the end. And just on Sunday I was around the 4-minute K pace and just pulling up really, really good. So I don't know what you guys are doing, but it seems to be working.
You're doing it too, buddy. You're doing it too. Based on that, like you're looking sub 4 race day. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and a key sort of point.
It feels good.
Yeah, key point there is doing the least amount possible for maximum gains. There's a whole notion in triathlon that more is more, training more, harder, faster, longer. And people get caught up with what other people are doing as well, and get caught up and going, oh, they're doing a 4-hour ride, an hour off the bike, and the next day doing a 2-hour run or a 3-hour run, and people get caught up with that. And again, for us, falling in that grey zone of simply training for the sake of training. Could you have got that same result? Yes, they might go and have a great result, but could they have got that result with with less effort? Same result, will pull up better, have more longevity in the sport, all those sorts of things. Yeah,
ultimately.
Yeah, not feeling smashed after every session, being a grumpy person to your partner, or falling asleep
at work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
was I. So was I.
Yeah.
Pastimes. I don't even know how to nap anymore. Yeah. But to wrap up, we'll just give you a couple of book recommendations. So gave you the podcast recommendation with Steph. If you don't or aren't familiar with Real Food Real, I'm on episode 8, 44, 70, and 30. Sarah's on episode 38.
Could be. I can't.
Anyway, she's there. It's called 21 Ironmans. 21 gels in an Ironman to LCHF. So that's a great podcast. Endurance Planet have Phil Maffetone on quite often, so suss that out. On another nutritional level, if you are quite sciencey, this book on low carbohydrate performance would be your go-to. Jeff Volek and Steve Finney, they're the guys behind the FASTER study, if you are familiar with that, which is the latest piece of groundbreaking research around fats for fuel. The next one is primal endurance. Sorry about the shiny stuff. There we go. So this goes into the MAF method as well as polarized training, as well as strength training, and really probably the closest thing you'll find to help explain our philosophy and everything that we do. Another one is The Well-Built Triathlete by Matt Dixon. I'll say that again. The Well-Built Triathlete by Matt Dixon. And there's a third. Oh, all of Phil Maffetone's books, obviously, but I can't find them.
Yeah, so if you're wanting to learn, more, understand more, obviously the more knowledge you have, which is why we're really big on education, the more knowledge you have, the more you understand what it is you're doing and the purpose behind what you're doing. And again, you'll get better results from that by understanding the purpose of your sessions and the plan overall.
Just to finish, we totally understand people coming on board and being completely overwhelmed, resistant, unsure about this, and that's cool. The greatest thing, and I think that's probably the most common thing that you and I celebrate and text message to each other, is they get it. They finally on board and they've had that breakthrough and they understand, and that's cool if you don't get that initially. We just ask for that trust because we know it works. And if it isn't working, we can definitely help you find a reason why. Yeah. Thank you so much. All have a great sleep. maybe jump on and do some meditation and some breathing to have an even better sleep. And make sure you follow up with any questions that you have. Say bye. You're all unmuted. You can say bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
See you
Thanks.
guys.
Bye.
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 Mhm.